So you want to address I mean, anybody who's been alive for the last 30 years can recognize the increase of pharmaceutical advertisement.
Yes. In fact, we're so used to it now that people may not realize that this has only been since the year 2000 that we've had direct-to-consumer advertising. And we're the
okay. So it's
only,
only been 10 years because I've
it's only been
certainly,
10
yeah,
years,
okay.
but
I remember when it
but
started saying, "What?
yeah.
What?"
And we're the only country besides New Zealand. And New Zealand is now looking at withdrawing that ability. They're looking at doing away with direct to consumer advertising. But here in the US it's going strong, and I see so much misinformation in that advertising, and just the message is always that, and I'm thinking especially of children. This message comes across not only on television and in magazines, but the pharmaceutical industry is now using the internet very strongly to market their products, and they're even doing direct to teenagers and children's programs and creating musical videos that will appeal to young people in order to entice them to want to take prescription drugs. And I just can't understand how the public would put up with this.
What type of drugs are they pushing that way?
This can be anything from acne to the whole depression scene. They
Okay.
keep emphasizing
Wow.
and they have since 2002 a presidential executive order was signed, which created the new Freedom Commission, and this was all done, I mean, Congress didn't vote on it, the public wasn't aware of it, but what it did was create money through federal grants to go to schools to do what they call
Mental health?
mental health screening.
I know.
Yeah. And it sounds like, oh, this is for the good of children, but it's not. I explain very detailed in my book and bring up what experts in the field are saying about this. It's only a way to get more children taking addictive prescription drugs, because the psychiatric drugs are all very addictive. The ADD, ADHD drugs, all of them, no matter what the brand is, they are rated in the same Schedule 2 substance abuse category by our DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency. In the Schedule 2 is the most addictive deadly drugs. Those are opiates, barbiturates, and the ADD, ADHD drugs are in that category. And we have, in this country now, more than 4.5 million children being made to take these drugs. The suicide rate of those drugs, by the way, is around 10%.
There's a lot of information to cover here, and like I said, at least I've covered lots of aspects and pieces of this over the years, and I can't recommend more highly the work that Kay Carlson has done and the research that she's put together in her book, Diary of a Legal Drug Dealer. Kay, at this point in your research, by the way, how long have you been researching this topic? I didn't ask that question.
This project was a nonstop effort on my part. I spent 2 years researching
Okay.
and writing.
All right.
It was a full-time job. It was more than a full-time job. I worked on the book 7 days a week. I was driven.
Okay.
I was so horrified by
Your realization.
the truths I found
Mm-hmm.
about the industry. And when I wrote the chapters about children, I had nightmares
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because it's that ugly.
Okay. I think I'll go here because we just have a couple minutes left in this segment. But what has the response been? Have you had negative response, attack, etc.? I'd like to know a little bit about that.
Okay. The response to my book has been very positive. I'm continually hearing from people from on Facebook, from my website, and then when I'm out in public presenting the book, people thanking me, saying, I'm so glad, but they also are oftentimes telling me their own horrific stories of effects that have happened to them. The only negative I've had was in a presentation I was making at a Borders bookstore. I had a woman who was extremely angry, and as soon as I started the presentation, she started yelling at me. And it turned out that she's a pharmaceutical rep.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate that to her, she only wants drugs seen as being a good thing because she makes her livelihood from it.
Mm-hmm.
And they can make a very good livelihood from it. But so I just suggested to her that she do her own research and write her own book, present. So at this point in time, that's been the only case. I've had other people who formerly worked in the industry come up and tell me, "This is great what you're doing. I couldn't have done it myself, but I'm glad somebody did."
Mm-hmm. All right, excellent. Well, I have more questions to ask you, Kay, but I need to take a quick break. And before I take that break, real quickly again, Kay Carlson, her book is titled Diary of a Legal Drug Dealer, website of the same name, diaryofalegalDrugDealer.com. Continuing into part 2 of my interview with Kay Carlson about her book that I highly recommend, titled Diary of a Legal Drug Dealer, One Drug Rep Dares to Tell You the Truth. Okay, you cover a lot of different areas and get into details about various aspects of pharmaceuticals, and you were mentioning the mental health issues and the advertising toward children and the drugs about that, and I happen to agree with you that that's pretty important, and so I would like to talk about that in a little more detail.
Certainly. I have a very grave concern that people don't understand and don't realize that what's called a mental disorder in the U.S., those are all voted into existence by the people that benefit from their existence. All right? So that's all they have to do. There's no objective test of any sort. There's no blood test, hormone, brain scan. There's nothing for what's labeled as a psychiatric disorder. They're voted into existence. The symptoms are voted on. So they're totally contrived. I mean, does depression exist? Yes, it does. People can be depressed, but the body can deal with it naturally. And the antidepressants are actually, which are so widely used now, are actually, the word is an oxymoron because they cause suicide. In fact, at a very high rate. Dr. Kahn reported to the National Institute of Health in 2002 that the suicide rate in clinical trials of all antidepressant drugs is 718 people for every 100,000. Well, the suicide rate in the general population of people not taking psychiatric drugs is only about 11 people for every 100,000. So it's extremely significant. And I'm not sure that physicians are even aware of the severity of this risk. And also the ineffectiveness.
Well, that was where I was going to go because I happen to remember statistics around the ineffectiveness because in February of this year, there was a really great article put out in Newsweek by a woman by the name of Sharon Begley. She's also an author and a journalist on various topics of interest. And this article got into the statistics around the placebo effect in antidepressants for the whole population, not just for teenagers. Something like 75% of the trials, the placebo worked 75% of the time versus the drug, which is huge.
Yes, it is. The people are much better off letting their body deal with. We're all going to have emotional ups and downs, especially with what's going on in the world today and the stresses we suffer from. But if you do things, if you have exercise, if you get sleep, if you have a social life, these are what help deal with being depressed or feeling anxious. In fact, there's research that was done in it was Kansas. I don't have the specifics in front of me, but that's exactly what he did. This psychologist at the University of Kansas devised a program that he called TLC, and it had an extremely high success rate. And the people were not put on any sort of drug. They were just put in this program where they had social contact. They were shown out what foods were healthy and would help them along. Their vitamins were checked. I mean, D3. Oftentimes people are deficient in vitamin D3, and that can cause depression. You know, I tell people, liquid sunshine. Get a bottle of liquid vitamin D3 and put some drops under your tongue and hold it there for a few seconds every day, and it'll have a marvelous effect on your attitude towards life. It helps with your sense of well-being. So there's simple answers. There are natural answers, and not psychiatric drugs.
Right, absolutely.
Because unfortunately, once people are labeled with a psychiatric disorder, oftentimes the side effects from a psychiatric drug will oftentimes be misinterpreted, and the blame will be put on the label that's been put on the person and not on the drug itself. And then we see people being put on these multiple psychiatric drugs. And with this, we've got children in this country now, children as young as 5 years old, committing suicide, and it's only because they're on psychiatric drugs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, children that young do not think about I'm thinking of a little 7-year-old boy now, just last year in Florida, that hung himself. You know, little 7-year-old Gabriel Myers hung himself. He was a foster child. He needed love and patience. He was put on multiple psychiatric drugs.
Yeah.
So, this is not the way to treat our children. It's not the way to treat ourselves.
Right. Well, you're doing a great job, Kay. Thank you. Kay Carlson on Common Ground at 100.7 WZLX. Her book is titled Diary of a Legal Drug Dealer. One Drug Rep Dares to Tell You the Truth. And the website is diaryofalegalDrugDealer.com. We're not going to be able to cover everything here, but I want to go on to one more. You have a chapter in here about cancer is big business. I wanted you to talk to that for a little bit.
Oh, okay. Do I dare mention that mammograms harm 10 women for every one helped, and that other countries are now discontinuing using mammograms because because mammograms are so harmful?
And how are they harmful?
Well, they can actually cause cancer. You know, the radiation can actually cause cancer in breast tissue. And there's also a lot of false positives.
Mm-hmm.
So women are being treated as though they have cancer when in fact they don't.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, you may mention that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What else would you like to say to that? The big business of cancer.
A big business. Chemotherapy. Those are prescription drugs. Chemotherapy are drugs, and they are dangerous. They are toxic. In my book, I quote the OSHA statement about chemotherapy products that warning how the healthcare providers that are administering it need to be extremely cautious because chemotherapy causes cancer. I mean, it's astounding to me that in this day and age we would be using something that is so damaging to the body that over years and years of data have been shown to not be effective. Rarely has chemotherapy ever actually been effective in curing a cancer. But yet, and 75% of oncologists that were surveyed said that if they had cancer, they themselves would not choose to have chemotherapy because of its ineffectiveness.
I have found over the years on those rare occasions that I do go to get some medical advice that I always ask that question. And if it were you, what would you do? And I have gotten that answer, well, I would wait.